Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The day started like it was supposed to. A celebration of love, of years spent together, of promises made long ago. My wife had arranged for a professional photographer to capture the occasion, our anniversary photo shoot. It was her idea, one she had been talking about for weeks, and I went along with it because it seemed harmless, even sweet. She wanted us frozen in time, smiling against the backdrop of a garden bathed in late afternoon light, holding hands like we still meant it. When the photographer arrived, I barely looked up at first. She was just a woman with a camera slung across her neck, polite, professional, and confident in her movements. She introduced herself Clara. She had one of those voices that was soft but steady, the kind that lingered in your ears even after she stopped speaking. Her hair was tied up messily, strands falling into her face as she adjusted her equipment, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I found my eyes lingering too long on her. The shoot began simply enough. She posed us in front of a fountain then, by a row of roses in bloom. "Tilt your head slightly," she'd tell me. "Pull her closer, like you mean it." My wife laughed and leaned into me, her hand resting on my chest. And yet, every time I followed Clara's instructions, my gaze wandered back to her instead. It wasn't intentional at first. I told myself I was just curious about how she worked, about the way she seemed completely absorbed in capturing the moment. But then, her eyes caught mine behind the camera lens, and something unspoken passed between us, a flicker, a hesitation. A question neither of us dared voice. The longer the shoot went on, the more aware I became of her presence. When she walked, close to adjust my wife's hair or shift the way I was standing, the scent of her perfume drifted across my skin. It wasn't overpowering, it was subtle, like jasmine on a warm night, and it stayed with me long after she stepped away. She had a way of giving instructions that felt personal, as though she wasn't just speaking to a client, but to me. Quietly, intimately, at one point, Clara asked my wife to walk ahead down a tree-lined path while I followed a few steps behind. She crouched to frame the shot, her eyes flicking up to mine as I trailed after my wife. It should have been a simple photograph of devotion, of me watching the woman I married. But in that split second, it felt like I was only walking toward Clara. My chest tightened at the thought, and when she lowered the camera, there was the faintest, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. After the session ended, my wife gushed about how beautiful everything had been, how professional and talented Clara was. She insisted we should book her again for family portraits, for holiday cards. Clara smiled politely, thanked us, and began packing up her gear. I told myself to leave it at that, to let her walk away like any stranger who passes through your life. But when she handed me her business card, her fingers brushed mine in a way that didn't feel accidental. My wife didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through the preview photos on Clara's camera. But I noticed, and I felt the burn of it long after Clara left. That night, when my wife fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The images from the day replayed in my head, not the ones of us smiling together, but the moments in between. The way Clara looked at me through the lens. The way her voice dropped slightly when she said, "Perfect," after positioning me. Just right? It was maddening. I had no right to think about her, yet I couldn't stop. Days later, the photos arrived in my inbox. They were stunning. No doubt my wife was radiant, her happiness glowing in every frame. But when I looked at myself in the pictures, I saw something different. My smile wasn't for her. My eyes weren't on her. Even in the images, they were searching for someone else. I tried to fight it. I told myself it was nothing more than a fleeting attraction, a harmless spark. But then I found myself replying to Clara's email, thanking her for the photos and asking about her work. She responded politely, nothing inappropriate, but the way she ended her message, "It was a pleasure working with you. You have a presence that makes photographs come alive," was enough to keep me awake another night. It didn't take long for our messages to deepen. At first, they were about photography, her travels, the way she captured light, the stories behind her favorite shoots. But soon the words slipped into personal territory. She asked about my life, my dreams, whether I was happy. I hesitated, then told her the truth, but I wasn't sure anymore. That marriage had become more routine than passion. That I often felt invisible. She replied simply, "You're not invisible." Not to me. The first time we met outside of the photo shoot, it was under the guise of coffee. She wanted to show me some of her work, she said. I told myself it was innocent, but the moment we sat across from each other, it was obvious we were both there for something else. The conversation flowed effortlessly, the air thick with things we weren't saying. When she leaned forward, her hand brushed mine across the table, and neither of us pulled away. From then on, it spiraled. Coffee turned into late night walks turned into stolen moments in places no one would look for us. Every time I was with her, I felt like I'd stepped outside of my life into something electric, dangerous, and intoxicating. She looked at me the way no one had in years, not as a husband, not as a man bound by vows and routines, but as someone she wanted wholly and entirely. I should have stopped. I knew the cost. I knew the destruction it would bring if the truth ever came out. But every time I thought about ending it, her eyes came back to me the way they had through the camera lens that day, as if she had seen something in me even I had forgotten existed. And so I kept going deeper into the lie, deeper into her. And all the while, the photographs from our anniversary hung in a frame on the wall, smiling faces staring back at me like a reminder of everything I was supposed to be. But every time I looked at them, I knew the truth. My eyes had never really been on my wife. They had always been on Clara. The secrecy became its own kind of addiction. Every glance, every word exchanged with Clara carried the weight of 1,000 things we couldn't say aloud. And yet, it was exactly that silence that pulled us closer. We carved out stolen hours in hidden corners of the city, convincing ourselves it was enough to survive on what little we could steal. Each time I told myself it would be the last, but the pull of her eyes, the certainty with which she touched me like she already knew every unspoken truth in me, always dragged me back. At home, the distance between my wife and me grew sharper. She noticed, of course. You can't disguise the way your body betrays you when your heart is elsewhere. She would ask why I was distracted, why my phone was always face down, why sometimes I seemed to be smiling at nothing at all. I offered half-truths, excuses about work, stress, exhaustion. She believed some, doubted others, but she never pushed hard enough to unravel the truth. Or maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she knew that pressing too much would expose cracks. Neither of us wanted to confront Clara, and I found new ways to risk everything. Once, during another job she had booked, she asked me to come by under the excuse of helping carry equipment. The moment the door shut behind us, all the restraint we tried to build crumbled. There was something about being in the middle of her. Whirled her scattered lenses, her canvases of light and shadow that made me feel like I belonged there more than anywhere else. She said she had never meant for this to happen, never thought she would be the one to fall for someone who wasn't free. But then she admitted she couldn't look away from me any more than I could from her. The danger only sharpened the edge of what we had. My phone buzzed with her messages at midnight when I was lying next to my wife, her words like fire beneath the covers. When we managed to see each other, the hours vanished, as if stolen from time itself. And afterward, I would drive home with guilt gnawing at me, but also with a strange, terrifying sense of being alive in a way I hadn't been in years. And yet, the weight of it all began to seep into me. There were mornings when I'd catch my reflection and barely recognize myself. I'd wonder who I was becoming, someone betraying vows, someone walking the line so thin it could snap at any moment. I told Clara once that maybe we should stop, that maybe the kindest thing we could do for each other was let go before it all came crashing down. She looked at me then, her eyes steady, her voice quiet. "Do you really want to stop? Or are you just scared?" I couldn't answer because the truth was both. The lies built on each other. My wife suggested another photo shoot months later, this time for the holidays. I froze at the thought, but she insisted. And of course, she chose Clara. The day Clara walked back into our home with her camera bag slung over her shoulder, I felt my pulse thundering in my chest. My wife greeted her warmly, oblivious, while Clara's eyes flicked to mine for the briefest second, carrying all the history we'd built in secret. That shoot was unbearable, the nearness of her, the forced smiles, the way my wife laughed without knowing she was placing her trust in someone already betraying her. Later, when Clara emailed the finished photos, I stared at them for hours. My wife looked radiant, the image of joy and love. But behind my smile, I saw it again, the same thing I had noticed in the anniversary pictures. My eyes weren't hers. They never had been. They belonged to Clara, even when no one else could. See it. We spiraled deeper still. Nights turned into weekends stolen with excuses. I told my wife I had business trips. Clara cleared her schedule just to have me. We spent entire nights tangled in each other's words and silences, building a fragile little world where it was only us, where no one else existed. In those moments, I felt like I could breathe, like I had finally stumbled into the life I've been searching for all along. But the world we built was always temporary, always one. Heartbeat away from collapse. There were moments of reckoning. Once, lying in her arms, I asked what would happen if the truth came out. Would she stay? Would she still look at me the same way if the mess of it all tore through everything else? She didn't answer right away. She just touched my face and whispered, "We'll deal with it when we have to. All I know is I don't regret you." And that was the truth neither of us could escape. For all the guilt, for all the lies, for all the destruction waiting just around the corner, we didn't regret each other. We knew what we were doing was dangerous, unforgivable even, but it was also the only thing that made us feel alive. Every day, the weight of the secret grew heavier. Every smile I gave my wife, every routine dinner, every moment spent pretending, it all pressed against me like a ticking clock. Sooner or later, something would shatter. But until then, I kept choosing Clara. I kept letting my eyes find hers. The same way they had the very first time, through the lens of her camera, when everything had already begun and I hadn't even realized it yet. The longer it went on, the harder it became to separate one life from the other. I would sit across the table from my wife at dinner, nodding and smiling as she talked about her day, but my mind would drift to Clara, her laugh, the way her hands moved when she explained a story, the way she'd look at me like she could. See every thought I was trying to hide. I knew it was wrong, knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Every day without her felt like I was living in a shadow. Clara and I started meeting more recklessly. We told ourselves it would only be once or twice a week, but then days turned into nights, and soon we were finding excuses to see each other almost daily. She would come by my office under the pretense of a photo shoot inquiry, or I'd swing by her studio to pick up prints. Each encounter stretched longer than the one before. I'd leave her place with the taste of her still on me, rush home, and shower before slipping into bed beside my wife. Sometimes she stirred, mumbling in her sleep. Unaware of the war raging inside me. There were times I thought about ending it, truly ending it. I'd tell myself during the drive home that I'd send Clara a message the next morning saying we couldn't continue, that it was time to stop. But then morning came and there it was, her name lighting up my phone. A single message asking if I was okay, and all my resolve dissolved. I couldn't quit her. She had become part of me in a way I didn't know how to undo. What made it worse was that Clara wasn't just someone in the background of my life. My wife trusted her. She praised her work, said Clara captured us better than anyone else ever could. She suggested we invite her to family gatherings, small dinners, holidays. And Clara, ever the professional, smiled and blended in seamlessly. But whenever our eyes met across a crowded room, there was something in that look that burned hotter than any fire. No one else noticed, but we did. We always did. One evening, my wife organized a small dinner with a few friends, and Clara was invited. She arrived in a simple black dress, her camera hanging from her shoulder like it was part of her. She mingled, laughed, snapped photos here and there. And yet, all night, her eyes kept finding mine. It was maddening the way she held my gaze for just a heartbeat too long, the way her smile seemed to soften when it was directed at me. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen, needing to catch my breath, and a moment later, Clara followed. We stood there in silence, inches apart, the hum of voices muffled by the walls. She brushed my hand as she passed me a glass, and that touch alone sent a shiver through me. Neither of us said a word, but we didn't need to. The silence was louder than anything. That night, lying beside my wife, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the dinner, the stolen moment in the kitchen, the weight of Clara's eyes on me. It was unbearable, and yet I didn't want it to end. I began to wonder if it was more than desire, if maybe what I felt for her was the kind of love that rewrote your life whether you wanted it to or not. The thought terrified me. Clara confessed something one night as we lay tangled together, the city lights spilling in through her window. She admitted she hated the lies, hated the sneaking around. She said she didn't want to be someone's secret forever. I held her hand, silent, because I didn't have the words she wanted to hear. The truth was, I wanted her more than anything, but the cost of that truth was a life I wasn't ready to let go of. And yet, every time I walked out her door, I felt like I was leaving behind the only thing that made sense. The guilt was crushing. My wife began to notice the late nights, the vague explanations, the hollow apologies. She asked once, her voice tight, if there was someone else. My heart pounded so hard I thought she could hear it, but I shook my head, lied through my teeth, and swore there wasn't. She looked at me for a long moment, then turned away. I don't know if she believed me or if she simply chose not to. No. Clara and I kept spiraling deeper. We spoke about what it would mean to be together openly, but every path was tangled in pain. She said she would wait, but I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes. Sometimes she pulled away, saying she couldn't do it anymore, but she always came back. I always went after her. We were caught in a cycle neither of us could break. Too scared to stop, too consumed to walk away. It all built towards something inevitable. I knew sooner or later the truth would surface. Lies like ours didn't stay buried forever. Every time my phone buzzed, every time I caught my wife's searching eyes, I braced for the moment everything would come crashing down. And yet, even in the face of that fear, I still chose Clara. I still let myself fall into her arms, still whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep, still allowed my eyes to find hers every single time, no matter where we were, because in those eyes, I felt seen. Not as a husband, not as a liar, not as someone bound by expectations, but as a man who, for the first time in years, felt alive. The days began to blur into one another, an exhausting carousel of lies and longing. I would wake up beside my wife, her hand resting unconsciously against my chest, and feel both the weight of my vows and the pull of something I couldn't deny. Every glance at my phone, every unread message from Clara felt like a secret heartbeat only I could hear. I told myself I was still in control, that I could balance both worlds if I was careful enough, but deep down I knew that balance was already slipping. One Friday afternoon, Clara texted me a simple line. I can't stop thinking about last night. I was at work, papers spread across my desk, the sound of phones ringing in the background, but in that moment the whole world narrowed to her words. I typed back a reply that was far too reckless. Neither can I need to see you. Minutes later, she answered with an address, her new studio space, still half empty, walls bare and smelling faintly of fresh paint. That night, I told my wife I had late meetings, kissed her forehead, and walked straight into a world that felt forbidden and irresistible. Clara was waiting. The lights dimmed, her camera equipment stacked in boxes against the wall. She wore a simple white shirt that hung loose on her frame, her hair pulled back. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked to me, placed her hands on my chest, and rested her forehead against mine. The silence was heavy, filled with everything we didn't dare put into words. What happened between us in that unfinished studio was both desperate and tender. The kind of intimacy that made everything else fall away. Afterward, lying together on the hard floor, Clara whispered that she couldn't keep living in the shadows. She wanted more. She wanted me, fully. I didn't answer right away. My throat closed with the weight of everything I couldn't say. Finally, I muttered something weak about timing, about patience, but we both knew it wasn't enough. She kissed me softly, almost sadly, like she already knew I was too afraid to make the choice she wanted. The more I tried to keep both lives intact, the more they began to bleed into each other. My wife noticed my distraction. She caught me staring into space at dinner. My phone always turned face down on the table. She asked me why I smelled like a different perfume when I came home, and I lied again, fumbling some excuse about a colleague. Her eyes searched mine with a sharpness that made my chest ache. I wondered how long she would keep accepting my answers. Or if she already knew but refused to say it aloud. Clara, on the other hand, grew more restless. She began pushing me gently at first, then more urgently. She asked if I loved her. I told her I did, because it was true, though saying it felt like stepping deeper into a storm I couldn't escape. She asked if I would ever leave my wife. I hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any lie I could tell. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, and for the first time I saw real doubt shadow her face. The danger of it all seemed to intensify the pull. We started stealing time in places that were riskier, an afternoon at a quiet cafe where anyone could have seen us, a walk in the park where I swore people were watching, hurried kisses in the backseat of her car. Every moment carried the thrill of being caught, and yet that very risk made it impossible to stop. The more dangerous it became, the more we wanted it. One evening, at a family gathering my wife insisted on hosting, Clara was there again, camera in hand, smiling as she blended effortlessly with the guest. She snapped photos of laughter and clinking glasses, of my wife standing beside me with her hand looped around my arm. But every so often, her eyes would meet mine across the room. It was subtle, but I felt it like a spark under my skin. At one point, I slipped away to the patio for air, and minutes later she followed. We didn't speak. We just stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her. When the sliding door opened behind us and my wife called my name, Clara stepped back into the shadows, her expression unreadable. That night, guilt nearly consumed me. My wife was warm beside me in bed, trusting, unguarded. I thought about telling her everything, just tearing the truth out of my chest and laying it bare. But fear stopped me, the fear of breaking her, of shattering the life we had built, of losing the version of myself that still passed as a good husband. So instead, I buried the words, and in doing so, I buried myself a little deeper too. Clara started talking about leaving, about moving to another city, taking bigger projects elsewhere. She said maybe it was the only way for us to stop before. Everything exploded. The thought of her being gone ripped through me in a way I didn't expect. I told her she couldn't, begged her not to. But what could I really offer? More secrecy? More half-truths? She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she wasn't sure how much longer she could live like this. The walls of the life I had constructed were cracking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything I was hiding came crashing down. And yet, even with the weight of that fear pressing against my chest, I still reached for her, still answered her calls, still let my eyes find hers every time she walked into a room. Because as much as I hated myself for it, as much as I feared the consequences, the truth was simple. Clara made me feel alive in a way nothing else did. Clara did not leave right away, though she talked about it often. She would sit on the edge of her bed with her knees pulled close, a cigarette in hand, staring at the smoke curling toward the ceiling while her words came out soft but sharp. She told me she couldn't keep being the shadow in my life, that the waiting was breaking her. I would hold her then, kiss the back of her neck, and whisper promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Sometimes she believed me, sometimes she didn't, but every time, she let me pull her back into me. The lies at home grew heavier. My wife noticed more my late nights, the way I avoided her eyes when she asked if something was wrong, the way my phone seemed to vibrate just as I left the room. Once she picked up my phone while I was in the shower. When I stepped out, she asked who Clara was. My heart almost stopped, but I forced out a casual laugh, saying she was just a photographer I'd met through work. She stared at me for a long time, and though she said nothing more, I felt the air shift between us. I told Clara about it later, and she asked me what I would do if my wife found out. I had no answer. My silence made her angry, but beneath her anger, I saw hurt, the kind that lingered long after she fell asleep beside me. That night, I lay awake staring at her profile in the half-dark, wondering how I managed to wound two women at once, one with betrayal, the other with hesitation. The more things spiraled, the more reckless we became. Clara and I began meeting in the daylight in places that weren't as hidden as they should have been. Once we walked through the art district together, laughing over coffee, and I caught a man from my office staring at us. He didn't say anything, but the knowing look in his eyes kept me awake that night. I realized how close I was to losing everything, and yet the thought of pulling away from Clara felt unbearable. One evening, I came home to find my wife in the living room, a glass of wine untouched on the table. She asked me directly if I was seeing someone. My throat closed. I shook my head too quickly, too forcefully. She studied me, her expression steady but her hands trembling slightly against her lap. After a long silence, she whispered that she didn't recognize me anymore. I reached for her, but she flinched, and that cut deeper than any words could. Later that night, I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, staring at my reflection, and hating the stranger looking back. Clara, in the meantime, had started booking bigger jobs. She was building something for herself, and though I admired her drive, it terrified me too. She told me she'd been offered work in another city for a few months, maybe longer. She wanted me to come with her. I laughed bitterly, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't even imagine what that would mean. Leaving my wife, my life, everything I had known, it was a leap I didn't know how to make. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She just kissed me once, long and slow, and said she didn't know if she could wait forever. I began to notice how fragile everything was becoming. Every conversation with my wife felt like walking on glass. Every meeting with Clara felt like holding on to something that might slip away at any second. I started drinking more, staying out later, blaming work for everything. The truth was, I didn't know how to choose. My wife was my past, my stability, the woman who had shared so many years of my life. Clara was my fire, my escape, the one who made me feel like I was alive for the first time in a long time. One night, Clara showed up at my house. It was late and my wife was upstairs asleep. I froze when I opened the door and saw her standing there, rain dripping from her hair, her eyes fierce with desperation. She said she couldn't do it anymore, that she needed me to make a choice. My chest tightened with panic. I glanced upstairs, terrified my wife would come down. I begged Clara to leave, to talk tomorrow, but she shook her head, her voice breaking as she said she was tired of being hidden. I held her shoulders, kissed her quickly, and pushed her away into the night, my heart breaking as much as hers. The next morning, my wife asked me why the front porch was wet when it hadn't rained. I had no answer. The tension inside me grew. Unbearable. I found myself imagining two lives, the one where I stayed, clinging to my marriage out of duty and fear, and the one where I left, chasing Clara into a future unknown. Both lives felt like they would destroy me, yet not choosing was destroying me faster. Clara stopped answering my messages for days at a time. When she finally replied, her words were short, sharp, almost cold. I realized she was slowly letting me go, and the thought of that loss was more painful than I had expected. For the first time, I truly understood what I stood to lose, not just a lover, but the one person who saw me when I felt invisible, and yet every night I still went home, still lay beside my wife, still pretended I could keep everything from falling apart. But the truth was already unraveling around me, thread by thread.